Chapter 7. Shattered Trust. After a while, Reed fell asleep at his computer. Meanwhile, Madison thinks to herself as she reads the comic she technically stole from Johnny when she was visiting Susan. Then she notices a snowflake out of the corner of her eye, and she looks confused, but inside the snowflake she notices a face. And she looks closer and sees Reed's face, and her expression changes from confused to worried. Madison gets up and she goes to find Susan, but she could not find her, and she mutters, "Shit," and she holds her head worried. Then she sees Ben, and she walks over to him, but notices the expression is different. "Ben, what's wrong?" Madison asks, but Ben brushes her off, which made Madison confused as he never done that before. Then she sees Susan and Reed walk in. "Yeah, I have that effect on people," Ben says to Susan and Reed, but Reed walks over to him as he says, "Ben." But Ben asks, "Oh, so you remember my name now, do you? Well, do you also remember what you swore to do with every breath in your body?" Reed looks confused as he explains, "We are working as hard as we can," which made Ben chuckle, then look at Susan as he says, "Yeah, I can tell," which Madison mad and steps in front of Reed and Ben, and she looks at Ben as she asks, "What the hell does that mean?" But again, Ben ignores her and says, "Victor was right," which Reed asks, "Victor?" "Ben, I do not know if this thing will change us back or make us worse." Reed looks at Ben as he points to the machine and adds, "I need you to be patient for a little while longer." "Reed, look at me!" Ben yells as he walks over to Reed, and Reed yells back, "I am looking! That is why I cannot make a mistake. I must get it right, and it is not right yet. We need to test it." Then Madison walks over to them again and uses her sonic boom powers again to spirate them as they began to argue. "Boys, stop it! Look, we don't know if this machine will work, but doing this shit won't help." Madison yells at the two of them. Then she looks at Ben. "I don't know what the fuck Victor has told you, but you promised you wouldn't brush me off like you just did." Ben looks at her as he realizes she is right. He did brush her off. Then he walks off. Reed sighs as he looks at the machine. Then he walks over to the generator and starts to boost it up, and Madison looks over to him after Susan left to find Ben. "Reed, what are you doing?" Madison asks, and Reed replies, "Testing it out," before walking into the chamber. Madison watches. Then she notices the electric playing up, and she sees Susan running in after she came back. Then both Madison and Susan sees Reed's face slowly dropping. Then he went limp, and both Madison and Susan ran over to him. "Reed," Madison says before Susan asks, "Oh my God, Reed, what did you do?" And Reed replies with, "I can make it work." But Madison firmly says, "The hell you are! You're going to rest." Then she lifts him up and carries him to his room with Susan, but Reed is muttering, "I need more power to control the storm." But Madison lays him down and gives him a stern look to say, "Rest." Then everyone sees the electric playing up again. "Ben," Madison mutters, and she runs over to the room, then grunts as Victor made her hit the wall to make her pass out, as it was unexpected from him. Then Victor disappears into the shadows as Ben walks out of the chamber, and he sees Madison passed out. "Madison!" Ben yells as he ran over to her. "Everyone thought I was safe behind those shields," Victor says as he steps out of the shadows, and Ben looks over to him. "You planned this, all of it," Ben says, and Victor replies, "I've always wanted power. Now I have unlimited supply." Ben stands up as he says, "And no thing to stand in your way," which Victor smirks at before saying, "Take a good look, Ben. This is what a man looks like who embraces his destiny." Then Victor hits him to knock him out, and he mutters, "2 down, 3 to go." After hearing the commotion, Reed steps out of his room and he sees Victor. "Vic?" Reed asks, and Victor looks at him and says, "Right on cue." Reed looks over to Madison and Ben and says, "Madison? Ben?" Then he looks back at Victor and asks, "What did you do?" And Victor replies, "Exactly what I said I would. I built the better, stronger being, and outsmarted the great Reed Richards." Without either Victor or Reed knowing, Madison slowly starts to gain her consciousness back, and she watches what's going on before getting up, and she sees Reed falling out of the window. Chapter 8. The Final Spark. "Reed!" Madison yells. Then she uses her power to block Victor's attack on her and sees him disappear. Susan runs in, and she ran over to Ben. Ben?" Susan says as Johnny and Madison joins her, and Johnny helps Susan lift Ben up and sat him down. "Where's Reed?" Susan asks, and Madison replies, "Victor took him." After a while, Madison sees a missile coming towards them. "You gotta be fucking kidding me," Madison says. Then she sees Johnny jump off. "Johnny!" Madison yells as both Susan and Madison go near the edge, and she sees Johnny flying, and she sighs to herself. Madison and Susan went back inside, but Susan told Ben to stay where he is, and both Madison and Susan went to Victor's building. After arriving, both Susan and Madison uses their invisibility to walk into the room, and Madison watches out for Victor, and she sees Susan stopping the freezer containers and unchaining Reed. "Sue," Reed says weakly, but Susan whispers, "Shh, what has he done to you?" And Victor cut the silence by saying, "How romantic," which made Susan gasp as she looks at him and she says, "Victor, please." But Victor replies, "Call me Doom." As Victor and Susan fight, Madison walks over to Reed and grabs his hand and slowly starts to heat him up as she stays invisible, and she sees Susan getting choked, and Madison hits Victor with an ice block, which made him drop Susan and looks at Madison, but as Victor was going to use his powers on Madison, Ben as the thing broke into the wall. "Get the hell away from my niece," Ben says as he punches Victor hard, which made a wall crash onto him after he landed on said wall. Madison went back to Reed and holds his hand to reheat him up, and sees Ben rip off another container before Victor and Ben fell out of the building. "Ben!" Madison yells as she heats up Reed. Madison thinks of something as Susan and Reed went to the stairs, but they look back at Madison. "Maddie, what are you planning?" Reed asks, but Susan already knows as she sees Johnny doing it. Madison walks over to the window, and she breathes in and out before falling out. "Maddie!" Reed yells as he watches. "Come on, come on!" Madison mutters to herself, then a pair of wings grew out of her back, and she began to fly. As both Reed and Susan went downstairs and outside, they see Victor trying to stab Ben and Madison with a pole, but Madison as a block on them to stop him. After getting Victor's attention, Johnny said, "You missed me," after landing next to Susan. Madison and Ben get up, and they stand by Reed, Susan, and Ben. Madison looks over to the fire hydrant, and she realizes something and looks over to Reed. "Hey, Reed, what happens if we mix fire and water to electric?" Madison asks as she smirks, which Reed clicks on. Then he uses his powers to wrap himself around Victor and says to Johnny, "Johnny Supernova!" Which Johnny yells back, "I thought we agreed that was bad." And Madison yells at him, "Now!" And Johnny runs over as his body lights up in flames and starts to fly around Victor after Ben pulls Reed away. "Sue, think you can contain it?" Reed yells, and Susan uses her powers to contain the flames. "Is that the best you can do?" Victor asks as Susan and Johnny stops using their powers. "Time for a lesson. What happens if you rapidly cool down really hot metal?" Reed says as Ben kicks the fire hydrant, and Madison uses her powers to make the water go towards Victor, which made Victor freeze as a statue, and both Ben and Madison stop. "Take that, Mr. Electric!" Madison yells out, and the others laugh alongside her. After a while, everyone is on the boat, and Johnny and Madison are talking as they drinking. But Madison's smile disappears as one of the girls drags him away, and she tries to distract herself from the jealously. Then she sees Reed and Susan outside, and she watches the interaction, and she smiles as Reed proposes to Susan, and Madison decided to tease them. "About time, lovebirds!" Madison yells out as she laughs. Then she sees Johnny walking off quickly and Ben following behind. She watches Johnny make their symbol in the sky with fire. Author's note: the end of this chapter. Let me know what you guys think of Madison, or the story so far. Chapter 9. Panic Attacks and Comfort's Dreams. 1 year later, Madison was walking home from the store with Johnny as they both needed to get some bits, and Reed gave Madison a list of items to get. Of course, Johnny walked on ahead as he spots a couple of beautiful women, and Madison rolls her eyes before noticing the reporters walking over to her, and she starts to feel nervous. Madison froze in place as the reporters came closer, and Madison unconsciously held on to the strap of her belt from her bag. "Miss Madison Hunter?" one of the reporters asks, and Madison breathes in and out to herself. "Yes," Madison replies as she looks over to 3 reporters. "We just want a quick word, if that's okay?" another reporter asked, which Madison nods to. Madison couldn't hear the exact question. To her, the question was muffled like she is underwater. Her fingers fidgeted at the strap. Her eyes darted to Johnny still ahead, still flirting. Clueless. "Do I run?" No, that would draw more attention. Don't cry, don't freeze, don't let them see. Smile. Say something. Anything. Madison's mind races, but no words came out. "Madison's sweetheart?" one of the reporters asks, but gets backed up by Reed. Well, not exactly Reed. It's his clone that Madison made in a time of need for him. "You made your point, miss. Now back up, clone," Reed says as he's backing up the reporters, but they open their mouth to object, but Reed didn't give them a chance. "Clone." Reed holds onto Madison as he helps her out of the panic attack. After a while, "Clone." Reed disappears as a male voice calls out, "Madison!" Johnny runs over to Madison as she's slowly starting to breathe again, and Johnny helps her up and sits her down on a bench. "I'm so sorry, Madison, for taking ages." "How are you?" Johnny asks worriedly. "I'm okay, just need to head back home," Madison says, and Johnny nods before standing up and helps her walk back to the Baxter building. "Madison, are you okay, sweetheart?" Susan says as she walks over to her with a tray of 2 cups of tea after Madison sat down on the couch. Madison didn't answer, however, as she's breathing in and out like she's trying to ground herself. And Susan reaches out gently, brushing a strand of hair from Madison's face. "You're safe now. That's all that matters," Susan says. Madison lifts her gaze to Susan and she slowly nods, which makes Susan smile. I made a clone of Reed when I was in my panic attacks," Madison says quietly. Susan looks at her with confusion in her eyes. "When I was in my panic attacks. I didn't mean to. My powers just reacted. I thought if I saw him, I'd feel grounded, like he could explain what was happening to me, like he always does." Madison adds on, and Susan sits down next to her. Susan took a minute to think about what Madison has said before she looks over to Madison and holds her hand. "Madison, that wasn't just a panic response. That was your heart reaching for something safe. And your powers listened. That's not weakness. That's incredible," Susan says as she smiles at her. Madison looks over Susan, and she thinks for a moment. Then she nods, and she smiles back. "Normal." Reed walks into the living room where Madison, Susan, and Johnny is as he's looking through something on his tablet, before looking up and sees them looking at him. "Don't tell me I have a coffee stain on my coat," Reed asks, and Madison does a little laugh before shaking her head. "No coffee stains this time, Stretchy," Madison says. Reed raises an eyebrow as he finally takes in the scene. Madison's flushed cheeks, the lingering warmth in Susan's eyes, and Johnny's surprisingly uncharacteristically gentle expression. He closes the tablet and tucks it under his arms, his posture straightening as he walks a little further into the room. "Are you okay?" Reed asks as he scans Madison's posture. "Getting there," Madison says quietly as she nods. Susan gives Reed a subtle nod, one that tells him she told her. Madison hesitates to tell him, and she looks over to Susan, who gives her a little nod to say, "Go on." Then Madison looks over to Reed. "You helped, actually," Madison says, which made Reed tilt his head slightly. "I did?" Reed asks as his voice holds genuine confusion. "Oh, yeah. Apparently you were very comforting," Johnny says as he's grinning, but Susan have him a look that made his smile disappear. "Nothing you exactly, but a version of you I created when I was spiraling," Madison says, and Reed's expression softens, curiosity flickering behind his eyes, but he doesn't interrupt. He just listens. "You helped me through it, told me to breathe, made me feel like I wasn't losing myself like you do," Madison continued. "Well, your heart must have known that you needed someone to hold on to, so it created a clone of Reed," Susan says, and Madison looks over to her, and she nods as she smiles. Later, at night, Madison is asleep in her room. In her dreams, Madison walks around empty space, looking around and calling out for anyone who can hear her. "Reed! Ben! Susan! Johnny!" Madison yells as she walks as her voice echoes through the darkness. "Reed, can you hear me?" Madison yells before she sees a figure. "Reed!" Madison whispers before walking over to the figure, but it disappears. Madison felt her breath hitching as she tries to break, but she felt a hand on her shoulder. "Madison?" a male voice says, but Madison's breathing slowly comes back as she looks at the figure. "Dad," Madison whispers as she looks at the black figure who is now beginning to form, clear as day. Scott steps out of the void in his X-Men uniform, ruby red visor glowing faintly in the dark. His presence radiates calm, strength, and love. "It's me, my little mouse," Scott says softly. Madison hesitates before she goes to him and hugs him, and Scott hugs her back tightly. For the second time, she felt safe. She felt like she belongs. Out of the dream, Reed walks past Madison's room as he went to the bathroom, and he notices through the cracks of Madison's door, Madison smiling in her sleep, which he does a little smile.